Okay, fine. Anyway, it's called Economy Means, and basically trying to do more with less in the new world. And I want to dedicate it to Michael Sorkin, who's a great writer on urban planning and architecture, probably the best American writer. And he passed away because of the COVID. So I wanted to dedicate to him. If you haven't read Michael Sorkin, you have to, because he's an extraordinary writer and very, very perceptive. All right, well, this is the world we've inherited. Fabienne asked me to discuss the public domain and public space and public situation. And this is, in fact, the new world. We have to ask yourself, since these are images from that COVID world, where do we go from here? What do we got to do? I mean, all this isolation and really alienation and political strife and social distancing. What do we do? The other big problem is, of course, the equity in architecture itself, the fact that there's a rich world and a poor world, and these are very big problems. These are not problems we're solving tonight, but obviously, because I do very small work and in a completely different scale, but it's worth considering because it really is a huge issue. The construction of human shelter consumes 1/6 of the world's water supply, 1/4 of its wood harvest, 2/5 of its fossil fuels. And billionaires have more wealth than 4.6 billion people, who make up 60% of the planet's population. So these inequities, everyone should be working on these changes. And one of the big issues that comes out of all this is that the problem that every city in the world is beginning to look exactly the same. There's this pressure for higher buildings and bigger real estate interests. So this proliferation has really become a major problem. In fact, as you certainly know, we had the unfortunate experience of Donald Trump, who was a terrible developer. But it's interesting, this is an article in the Post, and this is why do developers lie about the size of their erections? And it is a lot of fake macho men, I guess. It says, here's Donald Trump, who introduced the 90th floor tower. When Trump's World Tower opened in 2001, he proclaimed it was the tallest building in the world with 90 floors. If you count them, there are only 72 floors. I chose 90 because I thought it was a good number, Trump told the New York Times in 2003. And sadly, that's the kind of presidential guidance we've had for the past 4 years, which I hope will change. Well, anyway, this crush to build the tallest tower, it's again, the macho spirit started back in the sanctuary of Dionysus in the 6th century BC, and it's, of course, celebrated by Trump's statue in the Union Square. Fortunately, his statue was removed of Donald Trump. And one thing was amusing about the whole thing is that the Parks Department president in New York, who was responsible for taking it away, had a good sense of humor. So here he said, the New York Parks Department stands firmly against any unpermitted erections in city parks, no matter how small. Anyway, let's get rid of Trump and we'll be on to, in a sense, another issue, which is because of the liberation of digital technology, we're building more and more wildly configured building at enormous cost. And I think everyone knows that total buildings built in glass, titanium, aluminum, you're building in an off-gassing material of the extreme, and it's destroying the environment in a radical way. Part of the issue is definitely the liberation that we all feel. I mean, I use computers too, of course, but we all feel for what I call digital oversaturation, where you have this programmer breathing down your neck. I always resent it. That's why I do hand drawings, is simply to escape from having a monitor telling me what to do. So the CAD revolution has liberated form. And these are many of my colleagues, are very respected colleagues indeed. But everything is strange because I started as a sculptor, kind of a formalist sculptor, yeah, kind of constructivist influence in the early 60s. And what amazes me is is the most advanced technology, which is the computer, illustrating sculptural strategies that were started in 1910. From 1910 to 1960, these are the forms that appeared in art, in sculpture, either industrial or organic, and they're still appearing today. The same form, but with a completely different world. I mean, here we live in a world of ecology or a world of information. Information and ecology are the two big forces. Both of them are about systems. Both of them are invisible. Both of them involve the environment. And so why do we want to make 1950s sculpture? That's always a question I ask myself. Anyway, the other problem, of course, is public space, which is at the base of all these towers. There's always a slab of concrete with the usual checklist of paving, concrete paving, blocks to sit on, lollipop trees, pieces of sculpture, and a little squirt of a fountain. These are the cliches. And the World Trade Center tragedy, of course, was terrible, but almost a year before the destruction of 9/11, the World Trade Center was listed by New York Magazine as the most hated building and hated public space in New York. And, you know, it had that kind of plop art, what I call plop art. Here you see this poor little child fleeing in terror from public art. So what I want to talk about mostly today is the fusion of art, architecture, and context, when it becomes difficult to see where one begins and the other leaves off. Fortunately, I lived in Rome for a long period of my life, and I experience this every day, where you can see 2,000 years of civilization encrusted with iconography, communication, capturing light and shadow, magnificent elevations, public space. I mean, this one picture, as I say, to be able to capture that much vitality in one area is amazing. And then, of course, in Rome, you have amazing public situation. I imagine the innovation and Niccolo Salvi, the idea of melting a building into a landscape was, if somebody did that tomorrow, it would be avant-garde. Well, it was, and then this is what we get in New York. I mean, just imagine the comparison in sensibility. This is economy of means, but it doesn't say anything. This not only says something, but because of the scale references, the light and shadow, the innovation itself, the water, the different levels, it attracts thousands and thousands of people a day. Here's a typical USA public space in California. Again, the contrast is sort of evident. So one thing I've asked ever since I lived in Italy, because one thing I noticed that, and I always said that in Italy, I spoke to the buildings and the buildings spoke to me. There was this dialogue going on. Now, obviously, we don't longer have consensus iconography. We don't have the church or the state giving us imagery, a rich imagery to put on buildings, to make buildings. But the incrustation of architecture with information was incredible. I mean, this was, in a way, this was the social media of that time. What do we have as social media today? This is social media today. So again, I mean, the contrast of not only quality and sensibility and public domain to this. I don't know what you get on your Facebook every day, but I get this kind of junk every single day. And I always wonder, well, there's so many people who want to take off their clothes that you wish would they just keep their clothes on, you know. And then there's another problem. There are environmental psychologists saying boring cityscapes increase sadness, addiction, and disease-related stress. And is urban design a matter of public health? And that has become a real field of environmental psychology. So this is a serious issue, the lack of communication. So I just did this one picture using the Trevi Fountain as a centerpiece, but these are all relatively new public spaces in New York within the last decade. And all of them have the same cliches, the same bleak areas of concrete, the same potted trees, the same plop art sculpture, the same everything. And the difference is it just is not communicating. And it's also a reason, I mean, the reason for graffiti is certainly people want to express themselves or achieve their own identity in the public domain. This is a desperate effort on the part of some people to at least have some identity where they live and work every day. Okay, I'm going to go back a little just to show you that I really started as a formalist artist. I mean, I'd form space structure. In the early 60s, I was a sculptor doing kind of large concrete and steel works in studios. Actually, I had studios in New York and in Rome. My wife hates me to tell this story, but I had a beautiful skylighted studio in Trastevere in Rome. I had a beautiful apartment in Monteverdi in Rome with a view of the whole city of Rome. I had an apartment at Washington Square Village, which is like Greenwich Village in New York, and a 5,000 square foot studio on Broome Street in New York, and the whole rent was under $1,000 a month. That's beyond belief. I mean, those were the days. Today, I don't know, it was $60,000, $70,000 probably something. Anyway, I was welding away and working away in my studio and producing very neo-constructivist kinds of work, very form-oriented, very much involved with form and space and structure. And I worked a lot for architects because architects like this kind of organic form with buildings. I did plazas and pools and then I started moving more into the environment. I became a little bit more contextual. I got tired of doing just objects that sit or hang on the walls or sit on the floor. At that time, the sculptors were getting rid of bases on their sculptures. That was considered an obscenity in the 60s. So, but then I started moving to the environment and starting designing pieces more for context, contextual thinking, but still with a formalistic perspective on the whole thing. And so finally, I just woke up one day. Frederick Kiesler, during the last years of his life, was my mentor and my advocate. He helped me a lot. And finally, he just said to me one day, James, aren't you really tired of making that old-fashioned abstract sculpture? You know, abstract art is dead. It's a very old-fashioned. Why do you want to do that anymore? And why don't you start thinking about architecture? It seems you have architectural tendencies. So I started thinking about it. I started thinking about Rome and the incrustation of imagery on buildings versus the present plunking a Henry Moore in front of the building. And it really occurred to me that this was time to change. And I was teaching at that time. It was very interesting that I was really beginning to hate all these plunk down objects in public space. I was beginning to reject them. And so when I was teaching, at that time, I was teaching an architecture course and a landscapes course. And so I would put this picture on the screen. And I would tell the students, well, if I see anything on your drawing boards or on your computer desktops that looks like anything in this picture, you will fail my course. Well, of course, they were terrorized, but nevertheless, it did force my students to really start thinking about other ways to conceive of public space. So one of the first projects that I did that liberated me from kind of the sculpture at the top, these are, you know, what I would call plop art. I mean, all things in public domain, but they don't have a public sensibility. In the case of the ghost parking lot, which was a parking lot full of cars where we put asphalt over the cars, buried the cars. So it was an inversion because the petroleum project product was now consuming the cars. But the idea was basically you could not take the art out of the context without a total loss of meaning. In other words, you couldn't put this in a museum or a gallery without completely obliterating the significance of the work itself. And this is when we were burying the cars. Of course, here was the asphalting over the cars, making the project. So you can see the difference between Henry Moore and Object in the Plaza. This was art made intrinsic to its space. And what also occurred to me, again, from living in Rome, when I was living in New York, you only have 3 options for public seating. You can sit on a bench, you can sit on a block, or you can sit at a little coffee table, a little table at a cafe. In Italy, you could sit on walls, you could sit on pools, you could sit in the street, you could sit everywhere, you could sit on stairways. Italy, you could sit on everything. So I thought that just advancing that idea, just giving new options for public seating was a way of breaking into some new ground. So anyway, the thing I really wanted to talk about, and I think the one value I'm at this point, like everybody, I'm questioning whether I did anything in my life that was good for the environment or good for architecture or good for anything, because we really realize that there are some big problems. But at least in the case of the Ghost parking lot, it was a collage. It was recycled waste automobiles. We took the cars from the junkyard and we made a sculpture out of it. So the recycling was there. Now I'm going to talk about a reductive aesthetic communication, social, psychological, contextual source of idea based on this economy of means. This is so. So one of the first series, I think everyone knows this series, we did this catalog showroom company. And in a funny way, they sort of became the enemy of an economy because, of course, they drove a lot of small business out of business, and they always built these big boxes on highways, and they were always the same. There were always rows of them, and they advertised the same. They always looked the same. Some companies put bigger signage or brighter colors, but basically it was all the same sensibility. So we took the idea, the subliminal notion of a big box, and what could you do to change the whole psychology situation? And I looked at the Henry Moore situation, and when I was trying to explain to our client, Sidney and Francis Lewis, who owned the best, I was trying to explain, well, I don't want to put a big Henry Moore in front of your building. And he said, oh, no, we can't do that. That would take up parking spaces. So he was very pragmatic, and I limited that option. But what we did in the first building, very simple. We just peeled the building. We just roll back the brick. They had Cerebon mortar, this new mortar where you could pin together bricks. So it was a very simple, very minimal, and it was still public art and it had a message. It was a kind of a critique and a communication about architecture. Well, then I really got into this idea. And here's a nice statement from Picasso. Forcing yourself to use restricted means is a sort of restraint that liberates invention. It obliges you to make the kind of progress you can't even imagine in advance. And that's a very powerful statement. So we did a whole series of innovations and transformations of this kind of building. And it came from, again, from a very simple origin, from living in Italy, the idea that a facade would communicate. And they even did it in the Old West, in Arizona and Texas and places like that. In order to be seen from a distance, they did false front facades. So it was a great tradition. I thought that's worth using. So the first building we did for, one of the first buildings we did for Best was this, in what we call the indeterminate facade. It was a commentary, kind of a critique of that kind of architecture. It was also a commentary on process, building and unbuilding simultaneously. It also opened on the same day as this much advertised Orbox. This was, Orbox building was considered on opening day, and I got a lot of publicity, as the cutting edge of shopping center design. Well, you can imagine when this opened, the kind of criticism, especially from things like the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, if this would appear in one of their magazines, the next issue would always be cancel my subscription. So it was controversial. There was no question. It was using light and shadow in different ways. It was using construction process in different ways. There were the elevations were evocative or provocative, whatever you may consider. But it did change things. It really changed my idea. Sadly, Frederick Kiesler died before he ever had a chance to see any of my architectural work. So I kind of wish he'd seen it, because I think he would have heralded it as something new. And also he would have said, wow, James, you see, you took my advice. And it was, used a lot. It was very funny because it became a kind of useful commentary in the press. Anytime there was a social problem or a Wall Street problem, they'd use a picture of the building next to it to show that this is symbolic of the decline of the Western world. Well, anyway, I use this statement from Oscar Wilde in every lecture: an idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. And that's so true. So CITE's basic premises, and these are, I've been thinking, I said, did we do anything that was helpful to architecture, that where something good can be learned from it? And certainly using the process itself as the content of the work, the message, and architecture as a criticism of itself, architecture as a subject matter for art rather than just design, and then the question of using idea, attitude, and context versus sort of the Bauhaus tradition of form, space, and structure. So it's just shifting the emphasis around. So we did a whole series of buildings like this. This was mobilized. This was a motorized building. So while the audience stood still, the building moved. And again, it was a complete opposite of a Henry Moore sitting in a pool. Here the building moved. It became, and it was very interesting because, and the AIA rejected this. They always wrote about, well, that's not real architecture. Whatever. They always wrote, this isn't real architecture. Well, I never knew what real architecture was. But when you look at it, there are a lot of things going on. For one thing, it was a corner entry, which when you went inside, you could see the entire floor plan and everything, rather than a side entrance when you only are confrontational. And then it was like a jigsaw puzzle, so it used inside and outside elements. It was movement. In fact, the motor that moved the wall was created by the people who did the lunar rover. Then when the building was closed, like, let me go back. And when the building was closed, like the up here, you could see it was like a jigsaw puzzle. But when it was open, it was architecture, public space, and sculpture all in one. So it was a 3-in-1. So these are all the things that the AI didn't give us credit for, or didn't understand. Then we went on to do all kinds of fragmented buildings that come up hot in space in different ways, using sunlight. But again, all a kind of critique of architecture. They were making fun of that kind of architecture, of course. The tilt building. This actually was the most controversial. And I never understood why it was so controversial, because I thought it was really, just total minimalism and just a gesture that showed that you can do anything with engineering, because it is a kind of engineering feat. But also it involved people. I mean, here you can see the kids having fun with the wall and the people enjoying it. In fact, on opening day, some lady came rushing up to me. She was really upset. She says, how do you expect me to get up to that entrance? So for her, it had become, in a sense, a very real idea. But anyway, then other architects started tilting buildings. I mean, two highly respected architects, Fuchsas and Frank Gehry, of course. But my contention is, I've written them very favorably of both of these architects. They're definitely designers I respect tremendously. But I would ask them the question, why is it necessary to make tilting so complicated? This read, I mean, this is like, I call it highway art. It was putting art where you least expect to find it. Where when you start making it so complicated, it doesn't help the thing. In other words, it's really, and this is even worse. This is somebody who imitated it for the World War II museum, and but they missed everything. They missed the minimalism, they missed the rough material, they missed the interaction with people, they missed the perversity of the floating in space. They missed all of these things, and you can see it just got too complicated. So there's something to be said for economy of means in keeping it simple, keeping it simple. We did a little more complicated one here because the best company said, well, you'll never show what we do. You always, you do art, but you don't show what we do. So we said, okay, we'll show what you do. So we cut through the sides of the building, and we actually put a thermal wall. So it went from inside to outside. So all the toys and merchandise, bicycles, everything. On the inside, there were the real ones. And on the outside, we had a sculptor who cast them all. And he did a beautiful job. It's an incredible business. But it's a whole inside and outside. This is the way they typically display things. But you can imagine children love the fact that half the bicycle was inside and the other half was outside. So the inside out experience at least appeals to young people. And actually the Pompidou Center is considered an inside outside building, but it's done from a much more formalistic perspective. This is done from a more cultural, psychological, and rather perverse attitude. If you want to see the products, you just remove the building. So anyway, we did highway art. It was a subject matter for art and putting art where people would least expect to find it. Okay, integrated buildings and public spaces. Smaller structures using regionally available materials with lower environmental impact. So we did this in Vienna. I don't know if you've been to Vienna, but you probably know the bookstore there. We were asked to do the entrance in the bookstore, and we said, well, why can't we just cut an entrance? Oh, you can't cut an entrance. You can't touch a historic building. And I said, well, okay, what if we cut the piece out, but we preserve every part of the historic building? But believe it or not, they approved this. And you can see we kept the radiator, we kept everything. It became night seating in a public space. It became seating, it became interactive, and it still had the memory of the space. It was totally a collage. It was totally economy of means. It was totally done with a kind of found object. And we went on to do other things. We had a funny job for McDonald's. There was supposed to be a McDonald's to celebrate Ray Kroc, who founded McDonald's. This was near where Ray Kroc was born. So they wanted to do a special building. And the property was owned by an advocate of Site's work. So he said, you have to use my architect. You have to use James Wines to do this. And he said, well, you know, in fact, I had a meeting with the president of McDonald's. He said, look, I understand that you're very creative. He says, you can be as creative as you want, but you can't change anything. So I said, okay, I have to use this mansard roof and all the typical McDonald's pieces. So what we did a floating McDonald's. I just took the simple McDonald's and floated it. So all the parts float. So it's the same building exactly. It's totally recycled and it's totally different. And it's, again, economy of means. And people liked it. They really did. It was all the pieces were popped apart. It was great because you could recognize your friends by their feet. You could see them under the building when you came near the building. Children loved to play under the building. Parents could watch them play. You could be inside and outside, so it was the same time. So there were a lot of physical and psychological advantages. This is another person we worked for, one of the first great African-American fashion designers, Willie Smith. And we just designed a big exhibition of his work in New York that just closed recently. But it was Willie Smith. And he was a designer of what he calls streetwear. He loved the street. He loved streetwear. And so what we did for his, he said, well, I don't want to look like Ralph Lauren. The last thing I'm not Ralph Lauren in any way. I'm a person of the street. So we went to the west side where all the old gay bars are and everything, and looked around. We found a lot of these buildings being torn down. So we just took all the pieces from the street, recycled them as the interior. So they made very nice hanging devices. It was good for the models. The models enjoyed it. We did kind of innovative fashion shows where the models would dress and undress and use all of this streetwear. So we had nudity in fashion, which was very popular at that time. And, again, the raw materials were from the streets, and the roughness, we monochromed it, so it kind of made a background. So you kind of made a background for the fashions. So again, it was, and then for Willie's office, his personal office, we just drag cement blocks off a construction site across the street. Right across the street, there was a construction site. So they just gave us a lot of blocks and we built his office. But again, economy means, and this desk is actually, they're reproducing it now. They're making an edition of 10 of these. You can see it's being remade. And it was at the design fair just a few weeks ago, and it sold on the first day. So the manufacturer, which is Friedman Benda, is very happy. I guess we're going to make more of the Willie Smith desk. Also, another thing, in our office, our first big office in Manhattan, we made all the walls transparent. We made them out of the screening material, the metal lath that you put under plaster. So all the walls were made out of this. It was a Louis Sullivan building, so we wanted to kind of honor you so you could see all the Louis Sullivan decorations and everything. And at the same time have walls, and they have a gallery and everything like that. But you could see people right through the walls, which was very, very pleasant experience. And let daylight through beautifully. The daylight would come through, the night lights would come through. So it's again a great economy. Then we made that into a product for museums where you could buy a set of walls on a rail system and move the walls around. You could fill them in with opaque materials to make a solid wall, or you could have transparent walls. This was for the Museum of the Borough of Brooklyn, and it was transparent. You see right through the museum. And this is a baseball exhibition. Their first exhibition was on the history of baseball. Anyway, this is another economy means. This was Danny Meyer, who's a famous restaurateur, and he thought of this idea of the Shake Shack, and he loved these kind of highway kind of buildings of the 50s or 60s, this old-fashioned kind of highway art. And this is a historic park. And the first thing the city said, well, you can't put anything in that park. And least of all a new building. So we found out that actually this area had foundations. They had already planned in the 19th century to have a building there. So we built the building. We made a triangular because it's right near the Flatiron building. We made it out of rib material, so that it would be sort of like the Flatiron building. Then, in order to, they said you can't spend time building it. You have to build it in a week. So we made every part in New Jersey in a factory, and then we assembled all of it, and we built it in 2 days. We put the whole building together in 2 days, and that's the result. And it's super simple. You have all the triangular references. The building is the menu, really. The whole building is a menu. And we kept the references of the Flatiron building. And anyway, and there it is. And then there's a sculpture park in front of it. So it's funny, you always see sculpture through sculpture. So it's nice. And then it's good. It fits in very well. The city was so terrified it was going to not fit into the park. It fits very well. Well, let's talk a little about public spaces. People interaction, trigger elements to increase participation and change collage of recycled material. This is more using collage materials. And so we've done a lot of public spaces, and almost all of them have used found objects, found materials, recycled materials, whatever, almost all of them. And one of the earlier ones was the Highway 86. It was a transportation exposition, and the one on the left was, this is what the city was thinking of doing. And the one on the right, he said, why don't we celebrate the entire history of transportation and go all the way from the river in Vancouver and break off under the highway. So this whole thing was, you know, almost a half a mile long. And, it was perverse because we had things in the water that were supposed to be on the land and things on the land that were supposed to be in the water. And it became a celebration of all of that technology. What we did is we collected all the stuff. These are all waste, used, discarded vehicles. We cleaned them out, we cleaned them up, and we monochromed them so that everything would be a single color. Mounting cars in midair like that was not easy. And then you can see that it really became, even with no people, it became a kind of ghosted situation. And there you can see, it was nice because it was a high tide. The water covered up the airplane and the police car, and then the seals from the harbor would come up and sit on the police car. So you can see there are lots of inversions, interfaces, and then of course on any day we would have something like 150, 200,000 people. So it was very interactive. And one thing that we learned about from it is that by having a neutral background like that, people look better to each other. Their colors and their animation was exaggerated because of the monochrome environment. So we learned a lot about interaction, people, and public space, and it was used for performance art pieces. There were a lot of performance works done on it. And we call it our prosthetic approach, where people interaction and body movement become an intrinsic part of a completed work, similar to the staging of a theatrical performance. In other words, we saw the people themselves as part of the raw material of the creative process. This is another, in Tokyo, it's actually on the other side of the station, but we did a children's plaza for children on the other side of the Yokohama railway station. The funny thing is the heads of Isuzu, it was being sponsored by Isuzu cars. The head of Isuzu said, okay, I'm bringing my executives and we all have different ideas what we want to see. So one said he wanted to see a Japanese garden like the upright Ishi stones. So it had to be upright Ishi stones. The other one said, oh, I want it to be like outer space. I want to have a feeling of outer space. Then the president said, well, we want to celebrate the new Isuzu cars. We want to celebrate Isuzu cars. Okay, if your client told you your assignment is to design a place that celebrates the Japanese garden, outer space, and the Isuzu cars, what would you do? Well, what we did is we inverted the whole plaza. These are all people from different families. We cast them from life, turned everyone upside down. This is a little sketch of mine. With the cars, everything, the roots of the trees. So everything had a ground plane at one level. So the ground plane was invisible. So everything was inverted. Everything, including the trees, and you saw the tree roots, you saw the garbage cans, you saw motorcycles, you saw, and this is the casting. And it was very difficult in Japan because Japan people are very private and they don't like to be touched. And they don't like, they're not like Italy where everybody hugs each other and kisses before you've even met. It was very difficult. So we got families to be willing to have their feet and their legs and everything cast. And we assembled them in the plaza. And of course, children loved the plaza because they it was perverse for one thing. And you could jump on your father's feet. And, and again, they learned a lot about automobiles. Isuzu was delighted because we showed off their transmission, which they're very proud of. So again, it's a kind of public space that's dealing not with putting pieces of sculpture or potted trees, but it's engaging people conceptually and psychologically. Integration of existing landscapes. Fabienne mentioned that this project was one of the last of the best buildings, where we incorporated all the existing trees. This is a site itself in Richmond. And, again, almost all public space with trees is all formalistic. It's all that kind of potted tree thing. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we're going to build a shopping center, in fact, that was the only reason we got permission, is because, okay, we're going to save the trees. So what we did, let's see in this model, we actually saved the trees. And you can see what happens. It's just by saving the landscape, everybody was happy. And there was an inside-outside relationship. The story says that the people would bring their lunch so they could sit in the garden. And, you know, so, and they always say, well, while they're sitting there, they always think, well, there's one more thing I could buy in the store. So this was actually, even commercially, the most successful store that we ever did for them. And it had terrarium gardens. It was cut into the earth. So instead of showing a landscape architecture just on top of the earth, we show what was underground as well, which is nice in the summer because you know, sort of little worms and moles and things crawling around inside the walls. This is another building where in Florida where we preserved the landscape and we made it into a rainforest. So it was a building where it was growing, and then we ran water. We recycled water, just water, say water over and over again, down the glass. And we found out that the cooling of the water cooled the building down. They were using much less electricity for air conditioning because the building was cooler by far. And it was very nice at sunset because you had a real kind of illusion at sunset. This is just one that didn't get built. Unfortunately, we designed it, but it'll show some drawings. I mean, I haven't shown any drawings, so I'll show you a few drawings. But this was a house in the woods that was built by a couple. And they said they wanted it totally transparent. I said, well, you know, what if it's totally transparent or with all windows, you know, aren't people going to see you undressing and taking a bath? And they said, well, if people want to walk through that forest and look at us, they deserve to see what they can see. So we said, okay, you want to be in the nude in the forest. So this was totally inside out. So this was one of my first sketches of it. And it was going to be made in glass block with double hung windows. So there was going to be plate glass and glass block. Inside the whole building was glass. And then there was a courtyard in the middle to accommodate the trees. And again, you can see there's one reason I like to draw is I can catch the mood of the thing. Much more like you can with a computer. The computer can illustrate it like a photograph, but you don't catch the mood. And I was able to do details and ways of thinking, looking at, there were big boulders on the property, which we were going to bring right into the house. So here was one with half the boulders in the garden and half the boulders in the house. And the other one should have boulder in the house. We're going to try to bring all these rocks right in as part of, so it would be a totally inside-outside experience. And that's another sketch. But I would say you know, architects always laughed at me all these years for doing all these drawings. Thank God I did them because museums do buy them, which is nice in my old age. But it gave me a feeling about the thing. I mean, I could sense what I wanted to say. And it was a feeling that I can't explain. And so I still draw. I'm still one of the last ones drawing. They're still laughing at me, but what the hell? Well, then I got more into green architecture. I wrote a book on the subject, and we had a big project in Seville. It's a huge artery, all in water and landscape, which was housing about a dozen restaurants. It was done for the Seville World Expo. It was all about ecology. And actually the configuration was the shape of the Guadalquivir River. The whole river thing was exactly following the contours of the river. So one side you can see here was water, and the one side is water and the other side is vegetation. So you can see how it works. And then because I knew we wanted to have the foliage covering the building, we had to grow all these pieces of foliage almost 2 years ahead of time. So on like 2 weeks before the opening, we could plant them. And then we use this was our engineer used the electric power generated by the water wall to also generate the sprinkler system. So it was a very green building. Another thing we did is we made these columns out of perforated metal, and with seeded earth inside. There's seeded earth inside, and then it starts to grow, and then when it grows out, it looks like that. So you have this complete shade column environment, and it's in Seville, as you know, it's very hot in the summer, so it's like 25 degrees cooler under this environment. And you can see it interface with people. I always say that the problem with public spaces, they don't have people pockets. They don't have people where they can face each other and get together and enjoy the water. There's children playing with the water. And you can see it's yeah. And at night it looked good too as well. Okay. Anyway, here's another public space. I'll just show you. I'm getting kind of near the end of the site part here. This is in Chattanooga. This is where it looked when we started. It was all paved over, so we had to innovate with paving, really, in a way. And they had built this Tennessee Aquarium a few years before, and that was the way it looked in the 1990s. But it was built there before. So our idea was to build something around the aquarium, and I made the sketches. But I thought what we do is take advantage of the paving and make the art under your feet. In other words, a lot of the art experience would be underfoot, which is also economy of means. And then we had water walls, and it terraced down to the river. And so the plan was like this. It was the grid of the city with vegetation. And then as it got near the water, it sort of became more organic. And then we had all kinds of history of the city in the paving. And that's an old canal. We opened it up so it could run to the middle of the plaza. And then there was these bridges, you know, and that's not what you can see here. So it was nice. The paving, you know, cracked up and lifted up and made play areas. It made what I saw as play areas where children could sort of invent their own games. You can see through this. And then, of course, they became nice shade devices, organic water. This was the wall of the aquarium offices. So all day long, through the water, they could see children playing outside, and then didn't hear the noise. So, and then going down to the waterfront, and now this was when it first opened. So all these trees are huge now. They're very large trees. So it's a very shaded area. Anyway, so you get sort of the idea of integrating architecture context. And this is just a little project we did in Toyama. It's a children's plaza, really, and it's based on the horoscope. In Japan, horoscope is not a main symbol, but somehow the sponsors of the property, it was a civic play area. And in the middle here would be all the play equipment, and around these are all little restaurants and areas to sit and everything. So we did it sort of like that. You can see how it was done. It looked very nice at night with the lights. This is a city hall in Toyama, and that kind of vegetation. We used this regional vegetation as much as possible in the project, and you can see it was kind of fun. The children would play, but also they would eat in the restaurants, but then they would also eat in the corridors. So always the corridors were shaded, and so they'd eat there and have their lunch. And this is a project we did in Italy, because it's an art park, and the pavilion's over here at the side. We did the pavilion, but we also did the design of the park, where it was an urban well, not a suburban project, but here's the pavilion we did. And we noticed that the whole property is surrounded by walls. There's a monastery over here, but the walls go everywhere. So we thought it would be very interesting to pick up on the wall system, just use the wall system as intrinsic to the project. So the idea was really just to take the existing walls and just add to them, and then just go around, make this, and it'll go out the other side, and that's the pavilion. So this, and here's some of the wall pictures. This is some sculpture on the property by German artists. But you see, that's the monastery, and then here's the walls going down. So that's the way the building looks. And the idea was to totally integrate it with the landscape. And everything in it, interestingly enough, everything in the building, all the stone and the bricks and everything came from the surrounding area. Even the glass company was only 10 kilometers. So everything in the building was built out of materials that came from within a 10-kilometer radius. So it was very nice. And then we made a kind of cast stone column that served as everything. It served as the columns for the building. It served as sculpture bases. It served as, you could make sculptures out of them. And you can see it. It was all over. It was into the property. It was a farm. It was both a farm and a sculpture park, which is kind of perverse in itself. And this is the building again. But you can see the walls coming through, the old walls coming in the wall, the new walls. So, and then we extended the walls. We just carried the walls and put these. So you could always identify where you were. This is the inside. We made a glass stairway so you could see out. I mean, it was a beautiful view. And on a clear day, you could see the Swiss Alps and everything. So that, and then the T-shaped columns went all the way down to the roadway. So you always knew that you were on the Rossini estate, wherever you were. Ever you saw this wall, gardens, the gateway, everything. It was always a T-shaped column and the walls. So that became the theme for the entire property. It was just an urban planning device done for that. And then you can see it was great. It was accommodating. People like to sit and have a picnic there. This was an opening day. And then it was also totally integrated. It was, the whole idea was to see the monastery, see the wall coming down the hill here. And then, you know, the wall went down into the valley, and then it came back up, and it came the building. And then it went out the building and went on. So the whole wall is the building, then down in the valley, then up the hill again to the monastery. So anyway, you can see these are all small projects. You know, I have to say that, you know, they're modest, they're collaged, they're recycled. They're good from that perspective, but they're all very small projects. We still have the big problem of what we do on a huge scale. And how are we going to be more conservative? My contention is it can be other ways of speaking to people, other ways of communicating. I compared my life in Italy, where everything communicated because I could talk to the buildings and the buildings could talk to me. And in this case, you have to stand back half a mile to see the building. So it's a different situation. And these are just a list of the words I've used in they're not necessarily associated with architecture. These are words I like to say that we integrated into our work that are not architectural words. And I think that helps give you a range of content: melted, cascaded, mobilized, recycled, diffused, consumed, displaced, floated, morphed, buried, inverted, peeled, fragmented, ghosted. We did a house with all the artifacts of the house were melted into the wall, so it was ghosted, exposed, dematerialized, cracked, and collaged. So it's just, I want to make a case for having those words, because I think it has given us a kind of liberty that I don't think it would have. Then this is a good news, bad news ending. I mean, we're still, as I said, even the World Trade Center, they're building a new building. It's still part of this tallest building obsession. And I just wish it could be different, but this is the way of the world anyway. And now this is just a few at the end here. I wanted some promising new directions. This is a whole other lecture. So I'm just going to breeze through it quickly to show you some of the things I'm in the other parts of the lecture. And learning from history, as I learned from Italy, just the integration of site planning, materials, regionally available materials, location, everything. I mean, we can still learn from these things. We can't probably build this way. We don't have the same imagery, but there's a lot to be learned. There's also a lot to be learned from the early 20th century. So all these Harvey, Wiley, Corbett, plans in the 20s for layered cities. It would have been a lot better if we could walk on one level and have the transportation on other levels. It would be a much more, and there were many designs for that kind of city. Again, I'm looking into it so I can sort of really understand all these cities and talk about it. And then building in wood has become very popular again. Everybody's rethinking it. And historically, look at this beautiful 17th century wood house in Italy and China, of course. And here's a whole society in the UK that's experimenting with 9,000-year-old construction. The archaeological team is building a prehistoric house, how they built the houses. So you can see the economy of means. That was still very evident. And now this is, I guess, one of the taller new timber buildings. This is in Norway, and Vol Architecture did it. And there are other ones being done. This is one in Bordeaux that's being constructed in wood. Again, I haven't analyzed these to really find out all the characteristics and the advantages, but at least it is moving in a different direction. Also, I've been very interested about imagery in buildings, and where you really want to communicate with a building, like I was talking about in Site's work, where you have themes and ideas. And this idea of building a resort, it's by W.H. Studio in China, and it's a resort in which they've these little clusters of houses. And it works very well because people are in contact with nature and they're living on stilted houses, which are very nice. Because, I was in Hawaii and those areas, and especially Bora Bora, the people build stilted houses because it keeps them away from the insects, and it's cool. So these are amazing innovations in that regard. This is reflection, just using reflective walls to encompass the environment. So you can see the entire environment is enclosed by the walls. So it almost becomes a invisible house. This is, I think, very consistent with the computer age, in which we talk about invisibility all the time. This is totally integrating with the environment by Deca Architecture. It was a desert-like community in Greece, has all solar panels and interior courtyard, regional planning. But the whole idea, it's so melted in, you almost don't see it with it's in context. This is a wonderful young architect in Tehran, and she's inspired by the traditional architecture in this area of the Caspian Sea. She's building a small housing project there, reflecting its images. It's both humorous and perverse, and I think quite interesting, gauging the people who will live there, gauging them in their tradition. This is an amazing recycled building by Wang Shu and Lu Wenju. They call themselves amateur architecture, which is a very funny title for an architectural practice, but it's totally made out of recycled materials, buildings. Everything in it has been recycled from destroyed buildings and the detritus left over. So it's a completely resurrected, it's called Nimbo History Museum, completely resurrected from those kind of found objects. This is just, I'll just show you a few things we've been working on. This is one of those never-ending buildings. It started in 2011. They kept running out of money and they're still building. But we actually started building our first, serious all wood building in 2011. So we were early in the game there. But as you can see, it's done with slats of wood. It's a social club. The people like their privacy, so they don't look out real windows. What it is it's slats and little cuts. So everything is slats and cuts in the wood, and it's done on the thin edge of the wood. It's cut on the thin edge of the wood. So when you see it, you see the light coming through the building. They see out, you see sort of light coming through the building, and it's sort of integrated with its environment. It's again next to you can see next to a little river. There you can see the reflections in the river. And so you can see that's going to be that. This is another thing we're doing in California. It's a house, but it's in a very rocky area up here called Temecula, California. It's just a desert really, with lots of big rocks and stones. And we thought it would be interesting to do this, right? It's just do just the contours of the land, make the whole house in the contours of the land. And here again, you see the value of doing sketches. I can get the feeling of the house at least. This changes every week, so I have no idea what's going to look like next week. But the basic idea is to use stucco and mud brick or that kind of stone or whatever, and the stones in the property, and melt them all together so that you have this integrative house. This is just something because I know you, for the school, there was a version of the high-rise of homes done. I just tossed it at the end here because I wanted to mention it, because we're sort of resurrecting it. It was done back in 1981 as a hypothetical project. And now it's gotten interesting again. There's a lot of interest come to my office, and people planning shows and lectures and everything on the subject. But the thing that's interesting to me now, I'm really thinking of resurrecting that Sears Roebuck 1920s idea of catalog houses. You could order a house kit, and Sears Roebuck would send you the kit, and you could build your own house. And I thought, well, that would be a great way to do the high-rise of homes, just a kit. So you would have a kit of parts, and you would just assemble the house in any way. But the main thing is you achieve what I call identity density. It would be radically different from a Donald Trump building, that's for sure, because the individuals could identify themselves in the cityscape. So it's still a valid idea, and I've started to work on that. And again, it could be done with a lot of recycled materials and so forth. Anyway, this is me today after the world we live in. This is my self-portrait reaction to it all. But here we are, we're going to be rethinking it all. And I really hope all of you are doing it. You're all young people, and you're inheriting a lot of problems, that's for sure. I'm 89, and I've never seen the world in such a mess. There were so many problems. But I think you're going to have an amazing future, and I hope you do, and I hope you make great contributions. And this is the end. And I just wanted to show this one picture because economy also means using the paving under your feet. Thank you. That's it. Okay, Huzan, can we go back? How do I go back? No, can I go back to being big again? Let's see. Oh, there I am. Okay, I came back. Well, thank you.
We are so extremely grateful for this super inspiring lecture. And I guess that there are many questions, maybe some comments. Do you still have some energy for?
Sure. How long was that? How long did that last? I had no idea.
Exactly 1 hour 15.
Oh, good. Okay.
Exactly
I'm very
what
good
we.
at that. No, I figure people's attention is about an hour and 15 minutes. That's it. I'm glad I finished on time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll answer any kind of questions people have.
So, please, who wants to ask a question?
They're shy.
Always.
Even shyer.
Always. Okay, there's one.
May you hear me?
Yeah, I think so.
Hello. First of all, thank you a lot for this lecture. It was very, very inspiring, as Professor Florian Hertwig already mentioned. I would like to ask you, I view that most of the concepts that you was presenting are based on the interaction between the interior and exterior spaces of the public areas. What does happen to this concept in the cold countries where, for example, for 9 months you have snow, everywhere. So how could it work in that case?
Well, yeah, I think that the one big message I kind of bring out is we're very site specific. And I must say that for most of my life, I've not had that experience. But I think if I was given that situation, it's sort of like the Japanese project where I had to be space station and Zuzu and Ishi rocks. I mean, yeah, I really like those kind of problems. So they say, well, we never go out. So can you make my inside sort of like outside when I never go out? And I'm sort of living like that right now because I'm, I can't walk. And on top of that, there's the COVID problem. So to me, I would just face the problem. Yeah, I must admit, but all the projects I showed you are site specific, but there are very much situations where there's sunlight and inside and outside relationships, and people have, they're actually, favorable climates. It's a very good question, but I would, if I could work with you or some students, I would love that kind of project. It's sort of like the high rise of homes, how to get rid of that terribly bleak kind of world of high rise that we live in, where nobody has any identity. And how do you provide identity for urban dwelling people? So I think snow house is my next challenge. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the answer.
Any more questions? Cesar, please. Maybe you could say who you are.
Oh, thank you. James, first, thank you very much for this inspiring lecture. My name is Cesar. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Master of Architecture here at the University of Luxembourg. And I think most of all that are here are linked to that will of finding different ways to keep practicing architecture. And I'm really thankful that you have consistently doing that in all your practice. And I'm really wondering in all this time that if you have had like let's say this kind of sense of showing a Piranesian, let's say Piranesian way of showing the ring, and if you have the idea that we can have a different understanding of what green means, taking in consideration the lifespan of most of 20th century, let's say, common architecture, I think we architects are very good in making rings. And this way of that you are showing that we are capable of seeing a kind of afterlife of fancy architecture, totally merged with nature, make me think that maybe you are anticipating this way of seeing buildings as productive rings. I don't know if you have had this idea at some point. I'm curious about this time frame of architecture in your practice. And again, James, thank you very much for your words and your experience.
Oh, well, thank you for the question. The question's excellent, really. I mean, what you're really saying is that every young person in your audience has exactly the problem you're describing. We've got to find a better way. I mean, we are basically, National Geographic magazine says we are the cancer of the earth. And if we want to not be the cancer of the earth, there's got to be another way. Because architecture, the building of human habitat, takes almost, including all the heating and electricity and everything, almost 2/3 of the world's energy goes into habitat in some form. And what you're saying is so true. I mean, basically, as an artist and environmental artist, really, all I'm saying, I'm just kind of telling a story. I'm just creating a conceptual approach or a narrative to say, well, why don't we include the environment? Why does landscape architecture always have to be sort of manicured parks and things? Why can't it be more natural? Why can't it be more fluid? I mean, we just ask questions. And, you know, I'm a great admirer of Marcel Duchamp. And, you know, he said, you know, his idea of art was to ask questions. And the idea of architecture should be to ask these questions. And then you find that as you ask them, you get a desire to solve them. And if there's any message from what I talked about today, I would just convey exactly what you just said, that the new generation has a huge obligation to rethink it all. They really do. Because there's got to be other ways. I just cannot believe that just because a developer wants to spend money on that scale, that you have to have an all aluminum or all titanium building. That, to me, is insane in terms of the kind of investment, because it really, there's maintenance and, you know, all that. They're trying to make everything organic, and a lot of the materials don't want to be organic. Certain kinds of metal, you can bend them, but they always pop back. They always want to go back to being straight again. So there's just so many thousands of things to think about. I mean, I don't want to give an endless answer here, but your question was so good. It sort of is like everything I wanted to say in your question. Thank you so much.
Maybe if there are no more questions, James, can I ask you a last question?
Sure.
Maybe also for the younger architects, how do you approach, you know, when you start the design process? Because you said it somehow in the beginning of your talk, that it's more the process which is important, and also related to César's question, this time dimension that you integrate, you know, in architecture, because obviously, I mean, normally our, you know, domain is more space, but now we have to be also concerned by time. So I'm wondering, how do you start? Where do you start with, you know, when you design, conceptualize a site, what, you know, and also what are your tools? We know these tremendous drawings, but what is your method actually? Just
well, I think, you know, I tried to tell a little bit when I was telling what it was like when I was doing sculpture. And, you know, one day I just woke up and I said, I'm really tired of being in a studio by myself. I have one assistant, I think, and just doing objects. I just said, you know, I was very good at making shapes. And after a while, every shape you make looks good. And you can always tell, I would say this to every artist, when you start getting bored with your own work, and when everything you do looks good, it's time to change. That is definitely the time to change. Yeah. Well, Marcel Duchamp said it very well. He says, I taught myself to contradict myself in order to avoid conforming to my own taste. That is such everybody should do that. Because it does. And that's sort of the way we start. Another thing, I love teamwork. I really like some of the greatest joy moments I have were sitting with a group of young people. And I guess I'm very lucky for somebody my age. I would say 90% of the conversations and the inquiries and everything come from people in their 20s. So I still am talking to people in their 20s, which I consider the luckiest. I can't imagine anything nicer than being able to do that. And because, you know, we talk about ideas, we talk about what's next. So we talk about, and one day when we sit down, we always just kind of sit down and I say, well, we're going to do a house in California. All right, bring me all the cliche houses in California. I want to know what every other house in California looks like. Because we don't want to just do another house in California. We want to do something environmental or something conceptual or something special, or we want to do something that changes people's minds. And so then everybody sits down in the same spirit. So everybody feels at liberty to say whatever they want. And I always tell students when I was teaching, I would tell, look, you want to, if you really want to know what to do about the next project, you throw a project out, said, look, most people pick some cliche to start with. They pick something familiar to start with. And so they could just sort of do a theme and variations. I always tell them, go back to the dumbest idea you ever thought of. Just something nobody else would even think of. And that's where the ideas are, because everybody else thinks it's so boring, it's not worth any attention. And that's where the ideas come from. Now, I always use Einstein as the greatest example of all time. He was sitting in Switzerland, working in some tax company or something, and as a clerk or whatever. And, like he asked himself one day, what is time? Well, everybody in Switzerland will tell you what the time is. It's the time of day, the time of the week, you're late, you're early, time to retire. Everybody knows what time means. No one knew what time meant. So he asked himself, what is time itself? And by answering or struggling to answer that question, he made the most revolutionary discovery in the history of science. So have courage, go back to a dumb thing, something that nobody else is working with. And that's where the action is. That's where the creativity lies. So that's what one, I don't know if that helps, but that's sort of the way we work. But I love teamwork. I like working with people and bouncing off, and people bounce back and forth to each other. And so somebody said, well, we had a business where one of our partners was Michelle Stone. And she always said, oh, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about art. I can't say anything. I don't know anything about it. So we'd be working for hours trying to figure out an idea or something. Sometimes Michelle would just walk into the room, look at the table, and say 3 words. And I said, oh my God, that's it. So by being outside of it, looking in on it, she could sort of see how redundant we were becoming, how academic we were approaching the problem, and she had a fresh way of looking at it. So I think it's the fresh way of looking, the way you push your brain and figure out, and it could be a simple little thing like solving a door problem, or hey, it could be anything. I think anything can be reinvented. That's my feeling. I wish I could be at your school. I see all those real people together. I haven't been together like that for so long.
I think there's a last question. Yeah, I will say who you are, please.
Hello, I'm Albors. I was a student at Master in Architecture, University of Luxembourg. And thank you so much for the lecture. It was amazing, and completely agree with Florian about the drawings, and they're amazing. I can't say anything else. One thing about your design approach, my concern is that when we design, normally the lifespan of the building or public space or anything that we design is at least 20, 30, 50 years, sometimes 100 years and more. First, do you consider the future changes, changes in our needs and the way we live and the needs of the society that's going to change in 100 years, 200 years, and whatever the lifespan of those buildings are? Do you consider it when you're designing those buildings or spaces? And if yes, how you consider it without predicting the future? Because, well, we can't predict it. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. That's a very good point. And a lot of the things that I showed you were actually temporary exhibitions, or there were installations or things like that. I was just really talking about the sources, and I'm desperately trying to justify my existence. And that's a very good question. No, but I would say, sadly, a lot of the early best buildings, they were torn down, but every one of them was incredibly simple technology, very solid materials. I mean, that would last forever if you just didn't disturb it. I mean, it's not that it goes obsolete. Sometimes the simpler, the better is more enduring, that's for sure. And if we look at civilizations that have endured, they've usually been built with stone and rock and wood or whatever, and they use the basics. I think the problem now is we have so much technology and there's so many claims being made, but a lot of the technology I don't think has a long life, or I think it has to be sustained by technology. And that sustaining process using that complicated sources is going to create, probably it already has. As you certainly know, there's a lot of architectural firms that are being sued because their buildings are popping or leaking or whatever. And that is, again, the questions are really very good. But I think you sometimes have to, you very often depend on what your client has asked you to do. And I would say that if the project wasn't torn down, it would have probably lasted very well because they've kept it around for hundreds of years. The fact that it was not supposed to stay there forever that's a decision of the community or the client. But I do think you're right. When you're building housing, when you're building for the future, that could become an entire dedication for a life. Sustainable, meaning that it lasts, not just sustainable because it doesn't invade the environment, but sustainable because of the way it's built. And it's very strange because I live in a 1930s building in New York, and it's surrounded by more recently built buildings, which are very badly built. And they leak and their walls are thin, and if you have a barking dog, you hear it in the next apartment. Mine is a kind of Art Deco building, very beautiful, thick walls, smaller windows, and you almost never have to heat or cool it. I mean, just a little heat or a little cool air. So that kind of building is a much better building to build for the long run. It's been here since the early 30s, so here I am, and more comfortable than many of my neighbors who are in more recent buildings. So that's a huge question, and I applaud you for asking it, and just keep on with it.
Great. We will open the bar now because here it's time for a drink now, James. So,
oh boy, I wish I could enjoy that.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much again. It was a big lesson for all of us, and have a nice afternoon. Thank you, James.
Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thanks an awful lot. I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for the invitation. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.